House is in session. Minutes of the
Announcements.
meeting held on Tuesday, July 26, 2022, to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that those minutes be taken as read.
The question that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Yeah, okay. Announcements by Your Honour the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the President. Petitions, papers. Papers.
Honourable member for St. Philip South.
I'm commanded to lay the audited financial statements of the Barbados Agricultural Management Company Limited as at June 30th, 2018.
Honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded to lay the 2021 annual report and financial statements of the Central Bank of Barbados.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Honourable member for St. Philip South.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Protection of Agricultural Products Bill 2022.
Question that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable member St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42.5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sittings.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. Honourable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to withdraw the Civil Aviation Bill of 2022. It was laid on the last occasion and read the first time.
Order number 6.
Question that the aforementioned bill be withdrawn. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned bill is withdrawn.
Yeah. Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
In the name of the Senior Minister, Minister of Energy and Business Development, to move the second reading of the Electric Light and Power Amendment Bill 2022.
Honourable member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think that it is appropriate today for me to treat to this piece of legislation as fully as possible because of what really has been a very unfortunate or has become a very unfortunately charged political atmosphere and environment surrounding what is really the most trite of matters. You know, Mr. Speaker, sir, students of European history have been taught that when the Roman army conducted its conquest of Britain, that they destroyed all, sir, that came before it. And when they had completed the voyage of destruction and plunder, they looked at all that they had done and called it civilization. It is in a very similar way, sir, that we have in Barbados today a Democratic Labour Party that, having literally destroyed all that came before it, forgets that which it had done, sir, and looks back at its handiwork and speaks to the country in the terms of their work being glorious, and speak, sir, as though there is no question of accountability that should ever be held against them. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I said, this is perhaps one of the most trite amendments to a piece of legislation that it is possible to imagine. But yet, sir, it has unfortunately been charged with political partisan rancor, and in my view, sir, a lot of unnecessary posturing. And I feel it is my duty on behalf not only of the government, sir, but in the interest of the country as a whole, to come to this place and from the very start, sir, try to give some context to what has really been a lot of irrational babbling with respect to what is taking place in this House today and the Electric Light and Power Act and the amendment made to the Act. I do this, Mr. Speaker, sir, subject to two caveats, and I will share those caveats with you, two cautions. The first caution, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that I will not be used. I want to say this from this place. I do not intend to be used now or ever as an instrument of political child abuse for those people in the Democratic Labour Party who feel a sense of buyer's remorse. In the month of April this year, I believe it was, they held a special conference at which they invited all of their membership to participate. I believe it is correct to say that maybe 400 to 500 people participated. And they chose, Mr. Speaker, a new leader. I resent the fact that people from George Street would use this as this rancorous atmosphere artificially created surrounding the proposed amendments, the amendment I will now make, sir, to the Electric Light and Power Act. I resent the fact, sir, that people now feel it appropriate to call at my place of work, at the government's office, call at my house, Mr. Speaker, sir, to tell me how I should deal and treat the president of the Democratic Labour Party. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, he is not my headache. He is theirs. If there is a bring back Verla campaign, there's a bring back Verla campaign. If there's buyer's remorse, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is remorse, perhaps well earned, but that was something they invested in. None of us on this front bench, sir, or on the back bench, were taken by surprise when we saw the WhatsApp being circulated in Barbados of he who has now assumed the reins of leadership, lecturing a group of octogenarians at the St. Peter's Parish Church, sir, telling them that he will not tolerate any dissent in his party, and that if you have a different opinion, call him on the telephone, but don't get into the crosstalk. And none of us were taken by surprise, Mr. Speaker, sir, because we knew the character of the individual. He, for better or for worse, was once among us, having lost an unwinnable nomination in the constituency of St. James South, sir. He then decided that he would pick up his Georgie bundle and seek life elsewhere, which he is entitled to do. That he has now submerged to the top of that place that he has gone to, sir, is not through any fault or wrongdoing of ours. And I feel, sir, that I must say, therefore, that when I speak to the House today, it is without getting myself involved or accepting in any way the invitation to get involved in the rancor and the child abuse that those who dislike him would want to have heaped upon his narrow shoulders. I also feel, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the second caveat is perhaps more important on a national basis, and that is that it is really important for me as Minister of Energy that I urge that this sector be allowed to settle down. It is too critical to the country, Mr. Speaker. It is really in light of the circumstances that we face as a country, where our major breadwinner traditionally has been the tourism sector, but because of the obvious ravages of the pandemic, because, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the consequences of the war in Ukraine, the dislocation to trade and commerce, the recessionary trends which are taking place in major source markets, especially Europe, sir. And you don't have to reflect too hard on to understand what I'm saying, because it was only week before last that the euro fell into parity with the British pound. It is not difficult to understand, therefore, sir, the pressure on people who live in Europe to think in terms of a long-haul flight to Barbados with their family in tow to spend 3 weeks on the island. Those things that would have been taken as a matter of course because of the superiority of the euro, sir, now are difficult things for them to contemplate. And there is obviously going to be, and there has already begun to be, a knock-on effect in terms of even the cost of the passage to Barbados because of the rising cost of fuel. And therefore, with a reduction in spending power, a reduction in discretionary income, the increase of costs in transportation, Mr. Speaker, sir, for everyone, it is obvious that the tourism sector continues to find difficult circumstances within which to operate. And in light of all of that, it is exceptionally important that we allow for this energy sector, especially in the context of renewables, to be able to generate the kind of commercial activity, generate the kind of investment activity that the country continues to desperately need, and to allow for us to provide for jobs for our people, Mr. Speaker. And unfortunately, in all of the unnecessary hullabaloo that has been created around this particular narrow issue, it is almost a microscopic issue. But I will take time to go into it in great detail, because I have enjoyed, sir, now 18, 19 years in this place. And I do not ever recall, sir, a set of circumstances where I could have been accused of being less than truthful and faithful to facts on the floor of the House, and I will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker. So I will take my time to explain to you and to the honourable members, and by extension the public of Barbados, all that exists in this piece of legislation. But I started, sir, by making entering those warnings, that I do not intend for any role that I play in this debate to go down the path of the partisan rancor, or alternatively, Mr. Speaker, sir, lose sight of the fact that this sector is exceptionally important and therefore must be treated with the gravitas that it deserves. Now, sir, perhaps I should also make, and I was going to use the Latin term, sir, because force of habit on the feet. You are very familiar, sir, as an attorney at law, with the concept of a point in limine, the technical point, sir, which has to be argued before you hear the merits of the matter. And there are a few points in limine, sir, that I think that we have to treat too, so that we get a comprehensive understanding of what this is all about. Sir, it begins, number one, sir, would be the philosophical rooting of that which we are about. Why are we doing what we are doing? No, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's a very clear policy anchor that the country has to understand if it has not already understood. And unfortunately, a lot of the interventions that are made almost by way of a knee-jerk reaction, a kind of gotcha kind of approach to politics. Man, I got you. Man, I find something to grab along to. Like if you're searching for a loose thread to pull on a piece of cloth, sir, and you hope that you can eventually find enough thread to get the whole thing to unravel. Not so on this side. There's nobody, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the cabinet of Barbados who has failed to grasp the fact that this matter of the government's approach to the renewable energy sector is rooted, sir, in the question of equality and in creating, for the very first time, an opportunity in Barbados to be truly inclusive. Now, what do I mean by that, sir? I mean, sir, that we have seen several major areas of economic endeavor rise in this country. We are all familiar with the fact that there was a time when there was a thing called King Sugar, when sugar was king in Barbados. But when sugar was king, sir, there were only a few people in this country who were the real financial beneficiaries. King Sugar, as it was called, was king for people of a certain hue, as in color, and of a certain class, of a certain station of birth. For others, Mr. Speaker, sir, their relationship economically to King Sugar was that they were hewers of wood and drawers of water, that they would bend their backs to the boiling sun, Mr. Speaker, and cut somebody cane, that they would head the cane like a beast of burden and take it out of the field, Mr. Speaker. They were unworthy even to have a pot to pass water in the said field. You dig a hole and do what you got to do. But the reality is, sir, that the financial benefits, the multi-million-dollar plantations and the palatial homes that became the residences of the plantocracy, sir, had nothing to do with the vast majority of the working class people that are the ancestral line of the people that I represent and that you represent, Mr. Speaker. We left that sordid state of affairs and that economic profile in the developmental path of this country behind, and then we latched on to a new opportunity in tourism. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we saw a replica of that which came before evolve before our very eyes. So tourism became king, Mr. Speaker, but the domestic tourism product was comprised of two types. One, those people who came from overseas and invested a lot of millions of dollars and build lovely palatial hotels. Nothing wrong with that. It's an open economy. And sir, those people here who were the descendants of the plantocracy, or the ancestral line of the plantocracy, bore direct relations in many cases, and they said they're going to move some of that money onto investment, sir, not only in rural Barbados, but on the coast in particular. And once again, Mr. Speaker, sir, the people who owned the tourism product in this country did not look like you. They did not wear their hair as you do, Mr. Speaker. Well, you don't have so much hair anymore, but to the extent that you have some left, they certainly did not wear it like you do. Mr. Speaker, sir, they didn't look like the honourable member for St. Michael's South Central, and most certainly would not have wanted anybody with the hairstyle of the member for St. Michael's South Central to enter their doors, Mr. Speaker, unless, and even then, even if they enter the doors in the context of doing menial tasks like changing the linen in the bed, in the hotel room, the bedrooms, carrying a tray and a couple glasses of rum and coke, Mr. Speaker, sir, that was the relationship that the working class people that I represent in Hoyts Village and in Fitz Village, Mr. Speaker, had to the hotels and their owners, and to a large extent still have. They were the new hewers of wood and drawers of water in the new economic structure that was led by the king called tourism. That eventually, sir, though not ever replaced, had to be joined, because these false models of development, sir, can only be proven useful for so long before they betray their inherent weaknesses. And that's when we turn now, sir, to an international business sector. And this was something which was touted largely by the United States government, of a conservative president by the name of Ronald Wilson Reagan. And he, Mr. Speaker, wanted all of us to accept that the new way forward was to make sure that we opened our doors to offshore businesses, and you know the rest of the story, sir. And in many instances, this is what we did, and we have all lived the sordid tale of having opened that aspect of our economic activity to this type of investment, only to be told now, as by the OECD, because back then there was no OECD, there was no Financial Action Task Force, only to be told now by a Financial Action Task Force that those things which we do are not sufficiently transparent, and that we must now know our customers and know our customers' customers, and every imaginable rule, every imaginable obstacle is placed in the pathway of financial progress. But more importantly, what does it mean in terms of a direct relationship between the people that I represent, Mr. Speaker, sir, in Redmond Village and in Seaview, St. James, and the people in Haynesville, Mr. Speaker, sir, represented by the member for St. James South, and the owners of the investment? The reality is that, once again, this sector that truthfully does earn Barbados significant sums of money does not, sir, take along the masses of people in this country in a direct way. And the point that I am trying to make is that from as long as we have known ourselves, we have had sectors of this economy which played lead. But the relationship between the average black working class Barbadian, who all of a sudden you must not speak about, all of a sudden you must not speak policy adjustments in favor of, the average black working class Barbadian, Mr. Speaker, sir, it has been bereft of direct relationship to the owners of capital. No. I find it difficult, sir, for us to stand in this place in 2022 and to accept in any way, shape, or form that, and I certainly can't. I came to this place many years ago, sir. I entered on the front bench, and I sat where the Honourable member, who is Minister of Health, now sits. And I said then, very early, sir, that if there's one thing I wanted to do was to represent the Labour wing of the Labour Party. And back then, sir, I suppose it could have been argued that you could see a more conservative wing of the Labour Party. I do not know that you can say that at all today. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that I do not know how we can continue to conceive of economic activity in Barbados where you have leading sectors that do not see as part of it, of its structure, an ownership mechanism that takes along that journey of ownership and economic development and economic opportunity the people who constitute the broad masses of this country. For me, sir, that it has not happened is a disgrace. For me, sir, that it needs to happen is a self-evident proposition. Now, I say all of that, Mr. Speaker, sir, to come back to the point in Lemonade that I made, that this is an egalitarian philosophy that is driving this government with respect to renewable energy, sir. And it is the policy anchor. The philosophy, sir, is the policy anchor. And it is our first opportunity to be truly inclusive. And by being truly inclusive, Mr. Speaker, sir, the question must then be asked, what specifically do we mean? And that comes to the second point that I want to make. Now, sir, the execution of the policy as we have seen it has taken us to a few things which are exceptionally important. The first, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that on the 14th of March this year, the Prime Minister of Barbados made history, not only in this country, not only in this region, not only in this hemisphere, but made history in the world. It is a tragic thing that we live in a country which is now wrapping itself up in unnecessary knots over a renewable energy sector. I have heard, Mr. Speaker, sir, a black-skinned man born into humble origins in Barbados passed through the ranks of opportunity, sir, so that he became an engineer and worked at the island's sole utility. Mr. Speaker, sir, I have heard with my own ears and seen written that this same man who come from the bowels of our society can say that the renewable energy effort is nothing but a Ponzi scheme. No, let us start to dissect this, because as I said, sir, I ain't getting into the partisan rancor. I want this sector to understand itself as being ultra critical to the development of Barbados. But I also want, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the sector to settle down. It can only settle down if we now leave our allegiances, whether they be to capital, whether it be to partisan politics, or whatever narrow self-interest we have, because there's another one who runs her mouth very liberally in this country, and she is all about narrow self-interest. Now, out of an abundance of deference to my friend, the learned Attorney General of Barbados, I am going to go no further on that at this point. But I will say, Mr. Speaker, sir, I will say that when you're going to say these things about the renewable energy sector, let us understand what this sector now represents. For the first time in human history, we have a prime minister, our prime minister, coming to the House in a national budget exercise for the first time in human history, and saying that unlike that which has taken place anywhere else that you can point a finger to in the Christian or otherwise world, that you will have opportunities for all people in Barbados, born here and living here and owning a house here, to have access to solar photovoltaics or wind or whatever technology on their premises to fuel their house. Now, Mr. Speaker, what has happened in Colombia? What has happened in the mighty United States of America? What has happened in Great Britain? What has happened in Australia? And you can go anywhere in the world you wish to go, Mr. Speaker, sir, and the story has been the same. The new technology starts to unfold, and because it is new, it is costly. It is not mass-based. And you see what was happening here in Barbados under the Democratic Labour Party. Because you won't believe it, Mr. Speaker, sir, but the same woman that I just told you I act in a certain way towards, out of deference to my learned friend, was once a chairman of the Electric Light and Power Advisory Committee. It's a committee created under the legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir, and it had the duty of advising the Minister of Energy, then the Right Honourable Prime Minister of Barbados, Francis Stewart. He was the previous Minister of Energy, on the issuance of licenses and enrolling a new system, Mr. Speaker. And you know, sir, that at their finest hour, those people issued 69 licenses to Barbadian applicants in a year, in their finest hour. We are now doing, sir, the honourable member looks at me with surprise. 69 licenses was the best done in a year under that last administration. And we, Mr. Speaker, sir, are going at a rate that is in excess of 400 in a month. I do not intend to take tutelage or pupillage. I am not going to be in a position of pupillage from any of those people, sir. They are disgraceful, and they have no shame. But what is more important, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that as you would have moved around Barbados, and I know you do, you cannot go through Carrington Village, St. Michael, and find one solar panel on a roof in Carrington Village. I look in the eyes of the honourable member for a signal of dissent, and I see none. I know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that if I drive through Hoyts Village or Redmond Village in my constituency, I talk about where the poor people of Barbados live, man. I talk about the broad masses who went into the polling booths by thousands in order to elect a government and to bring order to the public affairs of this country in their own name and in their own interest, sir. I am saying to you, Mr. Speaker, sir, that if you go into any of the housing areas in Barbados, my constituency butts and abounds with that of the Honourable Member for St. James South at Thorpes and at the entrance of Haynesville, where if I go down through Haynesville, I will not find one single solar panel, Mr. Speaker. So these thousands of black-skinned Barbadians are being left out. They are not part of the calculation. But yet, in my constituency, if I go into the Sandy Lane area, Mr. Speaker, if I go into Prior Park, sir, if I go into Bagatelle, sir, I can find them. I will find them on the roofs there. So the issue for me as the policymaker must be, how do I make sure that access to cheaper energy to run the household of the poor people in Barbados is extended to them in the same way that it is extended to those whose pockets are a little bit deeper. And if we do not do this, Mr. Speaker, and if we do not get it right, we do two things. One, we repeat the tragic error of the past, which is the error I just outlined to this House, where every time we have a leading sector for inviting investment in Barbados, we have had that sector be a sector carried by the wealthy to the detriment of the ordinary Barbadian, to the exclusion financially of the ordinary Barbadian. Do not tell me, sir, that you are included financially because you get a job. Because I believe, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the right to have a job is a right that all Barbadians should have. But I also look at the quality of the job. I look at the access to the corridors of power. I look at the relationship, Mr. Speaker, sir, between me having the job and my being able to increase my standard of living. There are people in Barbados today working in the hotel sector, sir, who by the end of this month will be going home and they will not go back to work again until sometime in November, sir. That is the painful reality. There are taximen in the Bridgetown port today, Mr. Speaker, sir, who have no work because there is no cruise ship. The reality, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that we have to find a way of building into this economy an egalitarian framework where there is equality for the people and an opportunity presents us in renewable energy sector, sir. Not just to send a black-skinned man up on top of a tall roof to put on a photovoltaic panel, but to make sure that the roof of the house he lives in is providing him with passive income so that it can help offset the bills that he has to pay, he and the madam looking after 3 little children in the house. If I am wrong, Mr. Speaker, sir, for saying that, then I will die being wrong. But that's the first thing that we got to get right on the philosophy, sir. And the policy execution that we have been doing, sir, provides unprecedented inclusiveness. Because the second point I want to make, sir, is that if we don't get this done in a way that involves and allows the average Barbadian man and woman who own in a house, who live in a place together, sir, to be a beneficiary of cheaper energy in their home, sir, you are going to have another divide in this country. Another technological divide. So that you have another story of those who have and those who have not. And I want to know, Mr. Speaker, sir, from the critics, the Ponzi scheme man, I want him to show me the clause in Adam's will, which says that poor people should forever be deprived of opportunity, but that those who are wealthy and have pockets that stretch down by the ankles, sir, should have an opportunity to make themselves better off, to make their cost of living lower, to make the operations of their homes more efficient, Mr. Speaker. But that those who are least able to afford to carry the burden financially must forever be carrying a heavier and heavier burden. But that is not a philosophy I can relate to. It is not a philosophy I will at any stage of my living existence, sir, relate to. And that is why I reject it out of hand. And I make the wider point, sir, that if we as a country are prepared to let that kind of ignorance run free and unbridled, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, we're going to have another type of problem. Because COVID taught me a lesson. I don't know if it teach you this, sir, but I see some little children. I see some little children in Fitz Village. I see some little children in Seaview. I see some little children, sir, that come out of a chattel house there in the Heights, sir. That when the COVID shutdown took place, 3 brothers and 2 sisters sharing 1 tablet. I know places in my constituency, sir, where you had only 1 tablet, but you didn't have the Wi-Fi. Mr. Speaker, sir, that was not the case in the well-to-do areas around Barbados. But you know why it was not the case? Because there is a technological divide that this country did not want to open its eyes and see. So it took a pandemic to come and lay bare the fact that there was an absence of technological inclusivity, that they got people in Haynesville that had children that had to struggle and suffer in a way that did not happen when you look across in husbands. No, Mr. Speaker, sir, we cannot perpetuate that nonsense because all them little children born in a Barbados that they call home, all of them are entitled to carry a Barbados ID. All of them entitled, sir, to call themselves Barbadian citizens of the Republic. But they have equally, in my judgment, sir, a right to have equality of opportunity. And that we have failed them in terms of technology. Once again, it was this honorable member, who is now Prime Minister of this country, who struggled in order to get edutech and education and technology involved in education to the forefront of this country. And once again, having struggled to get that to the forefront of the minds of the people of this country, it was the Democratic Labour Party, led by the man who can weigh 3.33. I don't want to leave out any of the trees. Million. There who had difficulties. There who brought a no confidence motion in here, sir. Records of this house reflect that. So let us get it right. I am not taking any pupillage from anybody over there. They must do penance first. They gotta do penance first, sir. But the point that I am making is that that technological divide, that inability of poor people in Barbados to get equality of opportunity for their children, when it came to having access to technology for their children, education, sir, will be replicated when it comes now to the inability of poor people in Barbados to have equality of opportunity, to have access to technology when it comes to the efficient and cheaper running of their households. At what point do we stop brutalizing the working class in this country? Who will stand in the breach? So therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, you understand where I come from. I am among those who hold up the hand to say I will stand in the breach. This front bench are among those who hold up the hand to say we shall stand in the breach. And Mr. Speaker, sir, in the policy execution, we are at a stage where we can prove the inclusiveness of the policy, not only as the right to renewable energy as enunciated on the floor of this House by the Prime Minister, sir, but there are housing projects in which the government is working to shape the mortgage arrangements, especially, sir, the Hope, was the small one, Hope Advance, and then Hope Direct. In both of those cases, sir, these are projects that are unfolding. And in all of those cases, sir, they are based on the use of the roof of the house as a means of passive income for the homeowner. So that the homeowner, whether they got COVID or no COVID, whether you are employed or not employed, and we work to make sure everybody employed. But Mr. Speaker, sir, in hard times or in good times, your roof over your head helps contribute to the mortgage that you got to pay. And after a certain period of time, Mr. Speaker, sir, that mortgage pay off, and the roof over your head helping contribute to whatever other investment you wish to make. There is nowhere else in the Caribbean that I can find that policy. There is nowhere else, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the Caribbean or Latin America that I can find that policy. There is nowhere else, Mr. Speaker, sir, in this hemisphere that I am seeing that policy being unfolded by government. I know of nowhere in the world, Mr. Speaker, sir, where this is being done. But yet I am being told by a man who is deep in the pocket of capital that this, sir, is a Ponzi scheme. Now, sir, I want to say a couple things here now. I hope I don't have to go back here ever again. Talk to me. If you come to equity, come with clean hands. If it is that you are going to have all of these things to say, then also tell the public whether you left the light and power, but still draw dividends from Emira and the light and power. And if it is that you draw dividends, do you draw them in Barbados or do you have an address in Canada? So that the people in Barbados don't know that you're getting the dividends. Because you can't be two-mouthed on these matters. You can't be two-mouthed on these matters. You can't, on one hand, be the person who intervening to put licks in the government, intervening to put an obstacle in the path of poor people getting a little blind, Mr. Speaker. And at the same time, you are an agent of the same utility that you're always finding fault with, and then go all out to Canada, to your sister, to get an artificial address, Mr. Speaker. And your dividends going there. But nobody in here is supposed to know. Not so. It can't work. It can't work, Mr. Speaker. So when they want to act in the furtherance of the interests of the Democratic Labour Party or the furtherance of the interests of the capitalists in this country or the furtherance of the interests of themselves, Mr. Speaker, understand that as long as I am the minister, I am going to call you out. Now, the other point I want to make to you, sir, is that you know this same approach to renewable energy and the use of the houses' roofs to empower working class people in particular. Sir, you know that that approach has now been recognized at the level of the Summit of the Americas. You know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the CARICOM Regional Energy Conference has hailed Barbados as being a leader in terms of the way in which renewable energy should be used. And I don't ask anybody out there to slavishly support, or even to support. I feel we earn support. I think that we would not have gotten 30 seats on 2 occasions if we hadn't earned support. But Mr. Speaker, so I ask only that these people who want to be critics be fair to the facts and be faithful to the facts and stop using themselves, sir, stop prostituting themselves for the purposes of undermining the interests of working class people in this country. That is all I say to those who are pregnant with intent to put up domestic resistance to one of the most progressive approaches being taken to renewable energy. Now, there is a context to the artificial political posturing, sir, that we have to look at. And I'm going to walk this parliament through it because it begins, unfortunately, sir, with the cathedral of lawlessness that the Democratic Labour Party has allowed itself to become. The renewable energy sector is not the only victim, Mr. Speaker, sir. As recently as this morning, some of my colleagues and I were commenting on this furor that is being whipped up. And I want to say, with respect to the young man who finds himself, as I said, has submerged to the top of the Democratic Labour Party, I want to say to him, sir, that he could do himself a little bit he can help himself a little bit if he would collide, just strike a glancing blow with something called policy. Because you can't, sir, just feel that public life is only about stirring up furor and inciting panic and strife. Mr. Speaker, sir, that was how this country, unfortunately, was back in the 60s. Unfortunately, it was that way in the 50s, sir. But people now are a little bit more discerning and they expect a little bit more. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I must tell you that when I listen to that which they are stirring up with regard to, for example, the Auditor General report, bear with me because it is relevant. Hey, you know, sir, I ask if this is the same government. Is this the same government, Mr. Speaker, sir, that went where nobody else in the Eastern Caribbean went with respect to making sure that there's a financial management act of the highest kind, protecting the interests of statutory entities in Barbados and ensuring accountability at levels that are not to be found anywhere else in the Eastern Caribbean, sir? Is this not the same government? Mr. Speaker, sir, where in the Auditor General's report is there a finger pointed at any member of the Cabinet of Barbados with respect to misappropriation of funds? Where? But that has been the story over and over again with respect to successive governments in history. So therefore, if there's a comment to be made, sir, let us then again recognize that, yes, the soft underbelly of the public administration system in this country has been laid bare by COVID. I have no doubt that that is true. I have no doubt that the Auditor General is right when he points to challenges in getting information from government departments. But he is equally pointed, Mr. Speaker, to the fact that auditing firms, private sector auditing firms with big names, some of whom are ancillary to international companies with big names, sir, couldn't get the financial statements in on time. So how is that COVID impacts them and they can't get financial statements into the Auditor General on time? But if a statutory entity has a problem because 10, 15 people in the department out with COVID, and that for 6 months that has been the case recurring, all of us know that that's what happened all about Barbados, sir. How then does this become something to hang a whole government on? But this ain't got nothing, this bears no similarity to the millions of dollars that was frittered away. I almost said pilfered at the Barbados Water Authority. This bears no resemblance, Mr. Speaker, sir, to a state of affairs at the same water authority where you had an executive chairman, but there was no position in law. A man installed and being paid for a post that does not exist in law, Mr. Speaker. The Transport Board, same thing. The National Housing that went into hundreds of millions of dollars, sir, of squandermania. Those were the days when there was political accountability being called for by the Auditor General. I am yet to see a single page in this report that speaks to the necessity for there to be political accountability for wrongdoing. I see a report, Mr. Speaker, sir, that points us in the direction, as I said, of a weakness and a fragility in the public administration system, but the systemic failures have been pointed out by this government from day one. And that is why this government has been deconstructing and reconstructing systems across every department in Barbados over the course of the last 4 years. They're doing it at immigration, Mr. Speaker, sir. They have had to do it at CBC, Mr. Speaker, sir. We have had to do it at Grantley Adams International Airport, Mr. Speaker, sir. We have had to do it, I could call all, virtually all, and it is a work in progress. But there is this furor being stirred up out there a few short months after an election in which a man who, having lost his deposit, submerges to the top of a political party, sinks to the top of a political party, and in an act of a desperado, now is clutching at every straw he can find in an effort to make himself relevant, Mr. Speaker, sir, and hopefully for him to save what is really a leaderless institution characterized only by infighting from extinction. Now, Mr. Speaker, I use that only as an example of the wider problem that the country faces. We got to settle down and let us get on with the business of representing the people's interests. With specific respect, sir, to this particular amendment, it is necessary, sir, to remember that back in 2015, the new Electric Light and Power Act was enacted, 2015. It is, no, the Attorney General advises me it's 2015, advises it 2013. It was enacted in 2015. And I urge the Honourable Attorney General to remember that the government that was in charge was a Democratic Labour Party government. They got nothing right. A process that found its genesis back in 2013 took them 2 years to come to promulgation. And still, it carries all of the characteristics of a hurried bird who has built a bad nest, Mr. Speaker. They can't get anything right. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the fundamental tenets of this piece of legislation is that it serves to liberalize electricity generation and electricity supply in Barbados to the public grid. And prior to this, sir, we would not have had an economy or structure, a market structure, in which you, sir, could generate your own electricity and sell. You would not have been able to do it. So by allowing you to do it, and me to do it, and every other Barbadian to do it, Mr. Speaker, sir, obviously those Barbadians who had means got first mover advantage. If you got plenty $1 million in the bank sitting down, and you're looking for something to do with it, this is an opportunity to spend some money on renewables, and off you go. Now, sir, as I said, the first challenge we've had to have is to democratize this, because you can't just allow the deep-pocketed people to go to heaven, straight to heaven, sir, without dying. Everybody would love to be able to get to heaven without having to pass through death. You gotta make sure that there's equality of opportunity for everybody. Now, sir, the requirements under the legislation are that you have to first obtain a license from the minister. Poor soul, that's where I come in. And, sir, I listen to them, because in particular, the same two primary suspects in this matter, sir, you wouldn't believe it, but both enjoyed the opportunity to be consultants to the Ministry of Energy. No, you understand what I'm saying? You are a consultant. And sir, in the process of your being a consultant, you are so seemingly ineffective that you can't get your views heard or implemented. But all of a sudden, when your consultancy is brought to an end, you now have every opinion on planet Earth. And the legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir, requires that if you are a public utility, and this is really where the issue has arisen, if you are a public utility, and in this case, the Barbados Light and Power is the utility, and you're proposing to operate a generation system of a certain capacity, and that is set out in the first schedule of the Act, or you're seeking a storage license or a transmission and distribution license, and the Light and Power is seeking all, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, you have to publish a notice of your application in at least 2 daily newspapers in this country. And that must be done at least twice over a period of 2 weeks. And the Act allows, sir, for interested parties to have the opportunity to make representations of their views about the grant or issuance of the license. So you can make representations, you can make objections, Mr. Speaker. That is the right that you have as a Barbadian. Now, sir, for some perverse reason, it has dawned on folks, or a few folks out there, that because we have come to do an amendment to the Act, that the motive behind the amendment is to deprive Barbadians of the right that exists already in law. Now, it really, sir, is the height of absurdity, because the fact of the matter is that we are confronted with a piece of legislation that has not provided for any rules or any regulations, sir, for the process of making the representation that I just alluded to. So if you want to object, you are supposed to object to the minister, but there's no framework within which you're going to make the objection. The regulations, sir, to the act never were written. There's therefore no direction given to the ministry, to the minister, or to anybody as to how the invitation to make objection and to make representation is to be executed. Mr. Speaker, sir, obviously, the Light and Power published their notice of an intention to apply for a license. And at that point, it seems that all hell broke loose, because there are those with an apparent vested interest who feel that the Light and Power should have no license to apply for services for transmission and distribution of electricity, for the sales of electricity, for the dispatch of electricity, for the generation or storage of electricity. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am not going to, in this place, get into any discussion about my views on that matter. That is for the wider Barbadian public to make a determination on. If somebody objects and says that they don't feel in Barbados today, in this Barbados that we live in 2022, August, whatever it is, the 8th, that the Light and Power, sir, should not be granted a license for transmission or distribution or sales or dispatch or storage or generation of electricity, Mr. Speaker, sir, the wider public will form its own views. The point is this. It had been put abroad that this amendment will deprive a prospective objecting party from having sight of the application made by the Light and Power. Now, the fact of the matter is, sir, I would have thought that if you are purporting to be a legal advisor, and if you purport, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be a legal specialist in the area, then the first thing you probably should do is to become familiar with the law. Because there is no requirement in law to submit an application. You are required to submit a notice of an application. And that is what was submitted, a notice of an application. So I can stand here and say, without fear of contradiction on the floor of this House, that at no time up until today, sir, inclusive of today, is there any application before the Ministry of Energy with respect to either generation or storage or transmission or distribution or dispatch or sale of electricity coming from the Barbados Light and Power. No, that is not a hard thing to ascertain. And I feel that we have come to a point in this country where we got to leave the partisan ignorance behind us. It is unnecessary and most unhelpful. And Mr. Speaker, sir, if somebody wanted to know, I advise the young man who lectured the octogenarians in St. Mary's Church and told them that if they have something to find out or view, pick up the phone and call him, and he gave them his phone number. I advise him, sir, in less raucous and unmannerly way. If you wanted to know, all you got to do is to lift the receiver and I will happily tell you the state of affairs. I have no challenge with that. I don't see myself as being unapproachable, Mr. Speaker. So if you wanted to know, but the problem is they did not want to know. It was more salacious, more titillating to rush hot and sweaty and uninformed to the media to carry an impression. But you know that it was said, I believe, on the floor of this House by another stalwart of that party, now gone to the great beyond, that impressions count more so than anything else. And they remain true to themselves. The voice may be the voice of Jacob, sir, but the hand is the hand of Esau. They remain true to themselves throughout the passage of time. And the more it changes, sir, the more it remains the same. So that, sir, the ministry continues to receive objections to notices published to apply for licenses under the Act. The ministry has not received any application for any of the licensed areas which are subject to an objection. And the ministry, sir, recognizes the right of interested parties to make representations or objections to the minister. But this has to be done within the context, sir, of a mechanism that will ensure that there is certainty and that there is fairness. And I don't say this only for me, because, Mr. Speaker, sir, I may not be minister tomorrow. It is within the remit of the Prime Minister of Barbados to lift the receiver tonight and advise me that I ain't in the cabinet anymore. To advise me, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I will be in a different ministry from Monday. That can happen. So therefore, the view of a particular minister is not what matters. What matters, sir, is certainty in law. And I believe, sir, that you would be able to appreciate that given your considerable experience and training. What matters is the certainty in law. And therefore, sir, there has to be a set of regulations that give the guidance and certainty, so that one minister does not have an opportunity to arbitrarily treat to an objection in a way that another minister succeeding him would not treat to it. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, I see no difficulty in understanding that, and I see no harm in trying to make sure that that is done. It has to be noted, sir, that Section 5(4)(b) of the Electric Light and Power Act explicitly recognizes the need, sir, for there to be an opportunity given to parties to be heard. And therefore, we, at the level of Cabinet, sir, agreed that we would do an amendment to the Electric Light and Power Act so as to facilitate that or the creation of that opportunity for people who want to object to be heard. And that is in the interest, sir, of facilitating the same objectors. You're not coming to this place, we do not come today to this place, sir, to stand in the way of any objector or any proposed objector having their voice heard or their objections heard. We come to this place today, Mr. Speaker, sir, to ensure that a piece of legislation that was in fact deficient, that was in fact without the regulatory framework to enable us to facilitate the objection, now is corrected to empower those people who want to object, and whatever type of objection they want to make. Now, the language of the Act, Mr. Speaker, sir, is as follows: that an applicant to whom Section 3 applies shall not be issued a license until an opportunity has been given to interested parties in accordance with Section 5A to make representations or objections to the minister in relation to his application. So you are entitled, sir, to make your objection or your representations to the minister in relation, sir, to the application that may be made by the utility. Subject to Section 5A(6), where an applicant to whom subsection 3 applies makes an application under this section, the application and any information and documents submitted in respect of the application shall be made available for public inspection. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, that once the application is made for the licenses, the application itself and any documentation or any information relating to the application will be made available to the public, sir, for inspection by the public. Now, with respect, sir, to representations or objections regarding the application for the license specifically, the legislation will propose that an interested party who desires to make a representation or an objection in relation to an application for a license by an applicant to whom Section 5(3) applies shall, within 28 days of the first publication of notice of the application, inform the minister in writing of his representation or his objection. That means, simply put, that if you, sir, are an interested party and you hear that there's going to be, or that there is an application, as happened in this case, the Light and Power puts a notice in the paper successively for a few weeks. So you see the notice and you say, look, I have reason to object. I therefore, sir, am an interested party, and I am desiring to make an objection or a representation with respect to my objection in relation to the application that has been published, or the notice of application that has been published. And I have 28 days from the first publication of the notice of the application to inform the minister in writing of that representation or the objection. The interested party must state his interest in the application. He has, as far as practicable, to state concisely in numbered paragraphs the precise nature and ground of his representation or objection. And he has to include any supporting evidence that might be requisite with respect to the objection. And he shall not make any representation or an objection in respect of anything that is not directly related to a matter which is set out in section 6.2b or in section 3. Now, where the minister, sir, after consultation with that same committee, I told you, the advisory committee, considers that there is merit in the representation or objection made by an interested party, but that there is a need for additional information on the representation or objection, the minister may, within 28 days of receipt of the representation or objection, give the interested party an opportunity to provide such information, either orally or in writing. So, I am minister, if, sir, having seen the representation that has been made, and I feel, but wait, this here is making some sense, but I want further and better particulars, I can invite those further better particulars on which the representation is being made, and you have 28 days, sir, in order to provide that. It goes on to say, sir, that an interested party shall be given no less than 14 days written notice of the date on which you have an opportunity to provide additional information pursuant to subsection 3. I may say, Mr. Speaker, sir, that part of this process is intended to draw out of the objector the substance of that which he or she is objecting to. May I also say, Mr. Speaker, that in keeping with the best practices of administrative law, we would want to give the utility an opportunity to have its voice be heard in the process as well, so that it is not just John Brown get up and say, I object, and that's the be-all and end-all of it. Because in anything, sir, which is dealing with fairness in public administrative law, you want, sir, that the doctrine of audi alteram partem, let both sides be heard. You want, sir, for that to prevail. And it is against that background, then, that at subsection 5A5, the committee, in making a recommendation to the minister in respect of an application for a license, has to take into account any representations or objections made in relation to the application, any representations that they consider to have merit. It goes on, sir, to say that nothing in this section entitles an interested party to have access to information in the application of an applicant where the applicant requests, in accordance with subsection 7, that the information be kept confidential. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, I had pledged at the beginning that I would free myself from the temptation to delve into partisan rancor in any aspect of this debate. Let it be noted that the first draft that came to this House, sir, had a line which was open to a variety of interpretations. And again, Mr. Speaker, sir, this is nothing. There's no such thing as a perfect piece of legislation. I am not in the game of gotcha politics. I've been around here long enough to see several pieces of legislation by both sides, both parties that have held government, come to this place, pass this place, and then, sir, or in the process of passing this place, you recognize, you know what, we may need to do an amendment, and the amendment is done on the floor. I have seen, Mr. Speaker, sir, that it goes to the Senate and an amendment. In fact, I have served in the Senate, and I have led an amendment exercise in the Senate, sir, so that it come back to this House for that amendment, sir, to be approved by this place. These are not new things, Mr. Speaker. And that if a line in the legislation is open to more than one interpretation, and so we do the honorable thing, we ain't get into no dogfight, no feline urea and condiments. We ain't get into nothing so, sir. We say, look, for the avoidance of doubt, I sat down right here, had a discussion with the Attorney General, and he learned the Attorney General said, well, listen, for the avoidance of doubt, let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to pull this here, and we're going to substitute it so that there can be no doubt as to where we stand on the matter. Because it is not in the interest of the government, Mr. Speaker. It is not about the interest of winning any petty political minor battle or skirmish. This is about transparency in public administrative affairs in the wider interest of the economic development of a sector that is exceptionally critical to the people of Barbados. That's what it is about, sir. It is not a game in which anybody should become vainglorious, because I have not yet met the person who is incapable of error. Even if, Mr. Speaker, you feel that on your first public occasion, first opportunity to speak publicly to your newfound followers, that you allow them to know that if they have contrasting opinions to yours, that they should tender their resignation from the institution and leave immediately. Even if you are capable of that level of arrogance, I believe, sir, that you are still capable of error. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, this particular provision is written into it in order, and I repeat it, nothing in this section entitles an interested party to have access to information in the application of an applicant where the applicant requests, in accordance with subsection 7, that information be kept confidential, and the minister, after consultation with the committee, determines that there is merit in the request. It goes on. A request for confidentiality under subsection 6 shall include a summary of the nature of information to be kept confidential, the reason for the request for confidentiality, including details of the specific harm that would result if the information were publicly disclosed, and any objection to the disclosure of a summary of the information. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, why do we put all of that there? Because we are acutely aware that this process began yesterday. There have been many instances where the utility has had, or not this utility only, utilities have had to interface with the public. And there are some issues which utilities may wish to have, where documents and so on may be of such a nature, of so sensitive a nature, that they may not necessarily be helpful to the average person as they are prejudicial to the interests of the utility. And I think, sir, that applies not only to utilities, that applies to any company. In corporate affairs, there are always some sensitivities attached to certain types of information. You don't tell everybody everything about your business. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have allowed for the applicant to request information be kept confidential, but subject to the transparency requirement that you give a summary of the nature of the information that you want to be confidential first. Secondly, that the reason for your request is submitted, including the details of the specific harm that you feel you will suffer if the totality of the information was disclosed publicly. Now again, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the avoidance of doubt, if those who purport to be legal advisors, those who purport to be legal specialists, those who purport, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be authoritative sources, had an interest in being faithful to the process before this country, if they were inclined to put citizenship before self, Mr. Speaker, then at the lift of a receiver, either to myself or even the Attorney General, they would have been guided to the fact that that which we have included in this legislation, sir, is entirely in keeping with the regulatory structures of the Fair Trade Commission. At the Fair Trade Commission, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is the same requirement that if you are saying, for example, the Barbados Light and Power may wish to say to the Fair Trade Commission that there's certain documentation, certain information that they would rather not have publicly disclosed, that you say to them, fine, give us a precise summary of what is the information you want to be kept confidential. What is the reason for this request? And show me what the details are of the harm that you might suffer if this was to be disclosed. And let us then determine on the merits of the application whether this is something that we can agree to or that we will disagree to. That is written into those set of regulations which guide the Fair Trade Commission. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the question then is asked, what was all the furor about? Because this very simple exercise was intended to do two things. One, facilitate the same interveners and objectors who feel that they want to become involved in a process, a public process, as every citizen should be encouraged to participate in. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, sir, to ensure that there is fairness on all sides. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the only other point that I probably should raise is this question of interested parties. And let us be very frank, sir, about this matter of parties being interested in a process. Because I truly feel, Mr. Speaker, that again, I should not have to come to this place to do tutorials in public administrative law, especially when some of the head people who are making noises out there are in fact lawyers themselves. And one of the principles, sir, one of the principles, and you smile because you know where I'm going, sir, is that of locus standi. You have to have a relevant interest. If you do not require a relevant interest in a public process, then everybody who wants to be a busybody can involve themselves to the point even of being a nuisance and a humbug and a frustration to the process. So that is why not in Barbados alone, not in the Caribbean alone, across the Commonwealth and even in common law jurisdictions, sir, outside of the Commonwealth like the United States of America, the question of locus standi or relevant interest is always raised, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because it is, while it is a seemingly elastic phrase, sir, if you don't require a person to have relevant interests, you are simply going to create what I can only describe as a fertile ground for busybodies, sir. People who want to be frivolous, to get involved in the process and to render that whole process a nuisance. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, that's to speak about it in the language of the law. But what do I mean? I have heard with my own ears that gentleman who submerged to the top of the other party come on the radio. And he has, I made this point, sir, in all honesty. There comes a time when you got to start to even begin to think of yourself now in a more serious manner. Because he may be in shock that he has gotten to where he has gotten. But the fact of the matter is, sir, that he argued that everybody is a consumer. Everybody in Barbados is a consumer. But that is not so. That is simply not so. And the 18-year-old boy who is still at school, still living at mommy and daddy, has no job, sir, is spending his mother and father money. Let us be real. And how does he feel or experience a harm? How does his intervention become warranted? What is the financial loss that he's exposed to? What is the financial gain that he stands to get? How then does he locate himself in the process, Mr. Speaker, sir? And those are the issues that have not, I don't know why I would have to come to this place to explain to somebody who holds a law degree the basics, sir. But if I explain I must, then I must. You know, sir, the case of Commission and Stewart and Vision Developments, Inc., which is suit number 426 of 2017. Madam Justice Richards here in Barbados, sir, reinforced the fact that the drafting formula adopted by the Parliament, sir, with respect to our Administrative Justice Act, sir, and the question of public interest is extremely elastic. And therefore, the entertainment of applications that are justifiable in public interest requires for the court to apply some sort of a discretion to determine where does this public interest arise or not arise. That's what the law is. So it isn't a free-for-all, and it couldn't possibly be managed if it was a free-for-all. So now to try to attach a stain to the idea that there is a suggestion that there's a need for a relevant interest, Mr. Speaker, is a foolishness. Because really and truly, that desirability of having a relevant interest established is there in all aspects of public administrative law in the Caribbean, not just in Barbados. Now, I feel, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I should simply say this. For the purposes that we are looking at, obviously we are looking at persons whose proprietary interests, whose financial interests, whose economic interests stand to be adversely affected by any decisions made by the minister with respect to the granting of a license or not granting a license to the Barbados Light and Power. And I go no further than that on these matters, Mr. Speaker, because I genuinely feel that this adjustment to the Act, this amendment to the Act, is now self-explanatory. As I started by saying, this is a very trite matter. What should have been the most straightforward of exercises? You look at the structure that presented itself before you, the original Parent Act. The original Parent Act was woefully inadequate for the purposes of treating to an application that the Act invites people to make. So the Parent Act tells you, apply to the minister if you have a reservation about a license being granted. But there's no framework within which that application is to be made or heard or managed. But it stands to reason, therefore, sir, that you've got to create the amendment in order to make the whole process workable. That is logic. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, for that to have become a matter fraught with public political partisan rancor.
When this bill was passed?
I went through that already.
On December 13, 2013,
Yeah.
we sent home 3,000 people.
Well, that part. The Prime Minister, sir, makes a very important observation that this bill was passed on the 30th of December, the day in 2013 when we sent home, it was 3,000 people, 3,000 public servants. As I tell you, Mr. Speaker, sir, it's the Democratic Labour Party way. Rush, hot and sweaty, an imperfect piece of legislation, but you want to offset, you wanted to put something into the media on that day to blunt the impact of the atrocity that had been inflicted on the public servants of Barbados at that time. And now, without wanting to learn or understand the background or appreciate the totality of that which we're here to do, because, Mr. Speaker, sir, all that I have come here to do is to make life easier for those people who want to intervene. All that I have stood here and said today, sir, has been about empowering those people who want to intervene in the interest of the wider public of Barbados to say, for these reasons, we believe, or I believe, that the Light and Power should or should not get a license to generate or to dispatch or to sell electricity. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, it renders this then an unnecessary waste of parliamentary time, because we could have been in and out of this in 5 minutes. That I had to stand here on the floor of the House to go through this is because, sir, I remain faithful to those people who sent me here and to the leadership of this government, sir, which insists that there must be the fullest of accountability and transparency in the conduct of public affairs. We have nothing to hide in this matter, sir. And to the extent that there was the possibility of interpretations of a different type, we have pulled the legislation, we have redrafted so as to put it beyond doubt and make it pellucidly clear, sir, that this government is only interested in the advancement of the well-being of this sector, in the advancement of the well-being of the stakeholders' interests, utility and non-utility, Mr. Speaker, sir. And as I have said before on the floor of this House, let us let it settle down. Because we are too small and the global circumstances are too challenging for us to feel that we can ever survive if we create unnecessary strife and civil war between the utility and the populace of Barbados. What do we do, Mr. Speaker, sir, without electricity in the surgical wards of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital at this moment? What would we do? The aircraft that is on its way to land at this moment, sir, on a glide path, and there's no longer any electricity. What do we do, Mr. Speaker, sir? And we render ourselves guilty of participating in a foolishness if we're always going to be at the throat of either the utility or of stakeholders in the process, Mr. Speaker. I want to be very candid, I welcome and in fact invite further participation from those who are interveners and objectors, but I want it to be clear that I urge that the participation be constructive. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you ask me how they could be more constructive, I would tell you. Because I look at the act, I don't tout myself as the authority. And I have said on the floor of this House, I have pointed out already how the so-called authority has been far from authoritative. But I believe that she is capable of reaching a certain level of maturity and self-improvement. I want to engage, Mr. Speaker, on the issues of the merits of the Act for the new market structure that this country must have with regard to electricity. We cannot, sir, rely only, and this is what's happening in Barbados today, every application that has come before the Ministry of Energy, sir, bar one, has been for solar photovoltaics. Now, let's be very clear. When last weekend, the rain fell, or last weekend or weekend before, the rain fell for half a day, beginning in the morning, there wasn't a solar photovoltaic panel that generated any electricity. You're going to get 4 to 6 hours of electricity generated from any solar photovoltaic panel. The prime time, sir, is going to be between 8 in the morning, sir, and 3 or 4 in the evening. Outside of that, you ain't getting none. The reality is, therefore, sir, that we need to have storage of that which we create, which we generate. We need to have storage so that there's certainty of supply to the grid, so that when people go home at night and they turn on their televisions and they're burning 6 and 7 lights in the house and the outside floodlights are on, etc., Mr. Speaker, that there is the supply being given to them. And if you're going to go completely green, we got to take ourselves off of the reliance of fossil fuel and allow the grid to be green. But the grid cannot be green only if you're generating electricity for 4 or 5 hours during the course of a day. Because when nighttime comes, Mr. Speaker, we have to be able to ensure that all of this country has access to light and to energy throughout the course of the night for all the activities that we have. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the only way that we can achieve that is if we have battery storage annexed to the generation of electricity, so that as you generate, you store, and then you sell into the grid. And the off-taker, the utility, is able to take that power from you and apply it, transmit, I use the word dispatch it wherever on the island it is necessary. So that if there's a big activity and it's requiring a lot of light, etc., you dispatch it there. You dispatch it all across the island, Mr. Speaker. The act that we now dealing with does not say a word about battery storage. This is the ignorance that took place. And I urge those people who want to be consultants and want to be interveners and want to be objectors and so on to let us now have the mature discussion that I know they're capable of. Let us get real in the interest, not of the government, get real in the interest of the people of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, sir, that if we are going to look at the act which is bereft as it is of some of the basic fundamentals for the development of the electricity sector, that, sir, we got now to see how we can rewrite and redraft that act. And I don't want to hear that when we have come with a new draft act to ensure that we can do the things we need to do with battery storage, to ensure that we can properly treat to competitive procurement in areas such as wind energy offshore, for example. You know that we have a national energy policy, sir, that envisages that we can get 150 megawatts of wind energy generated in this country offshore Barbados. But there's not one Barbadian, there's not one who's put in the application to do anything in wind. Well, sorry, there's one Barbadian who's put in the application. Beyond that, none. And that's onshore wind, not offshore. And you know why, Mr. Speaker? Because the scale of the investment is massive. As I tell you, everybody wants to get to heaven, but no boy won't die. But if the scale of the investment is massive, but we have a utility here that is prepared to work with the government in assisting us to source batteries at a time when the whole world is struggling to find batteries, Mr. Speaker. And unless you intervene at a large scale to source, then nobody ain't taking you on. It is like the vaccines with COVID, Mr. Speaker. Those who have money and can get large scale, then I can hear you. But if you come in for a little nene or something, then you can wait. Because it's not worth my time to supply it to you. Not worth my time to try and ship it to you. The logistical effort is not worth it. So we say that we want to work in a productive way with the utility. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we have people who will not see the wood but for the trees. It can't only be about making yourself larger than the process, making the process reduced to being a humbug, turning people's minds off with ignorance about Ponzi schemes and so on. Mr. Speaker, sir, it has to be about how we ensure that there is fairness in the process, which is why we have come here today, because this is about fairness. It is also, Mr. Speaker, sir, about how we ensure access to opportunity. It is about how we ensure, Mr. Speaker, sir, further access for financial benefit for the people of Barbados, because once you are able to have the battery storage, that is a form of investment that allows us to carry along more Barbadians in the journey. And the Honourable Prime Minister, sir, on the 14th of March, made all of this abundantly clear. But there is a desire to relitigate, I feel, a general election whose outcome is beyond doubt. And if you struggle to win it, if you struggle, sir, to keep a deposit, take a little time and think about policy first before you come to intervene in matters that you clearly do not understand. Take a little time to get a breadth of input in a cross-section of opinion to help you shape your perspective. I give this advice gratuitously to the young man because I too am a Barbadian and I too feel that the country deserves better, Mr. Speaker. But that is the reason why there's buyer's remorse in George Street today. That's the reason why we're hearing of a Bring Back Verla campaign today. That in a few short months, there's been a betrayal of confidence and a demonstration of unbelievable arrogance and a complete disconnect with policy. And Mr. Speaker, sir, as I said, that is not for me to fix. The country deserves better. I also, before I close, Mr. Speaker, want to say a couple words about this question of transparency. Because people have to be very cautious about how they try to elevate themselves above the national well-being. I do not want, and I am resisting it with every fiber of my being, I do not want to be dragged into any confrontation with any citizen of this country on a matter that should carry along everybody. But Mr. Speaker, sir, we have a Fair Trade Commission in Barbados, sir, whose role is to be the economic regulator in this particular matter of renewable energy. It is the Fair Trade Commission that is going to be setting rates. It is not the government of Barbados. It is the Fair Trade Commission, an independent quasi-judicial body. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is the most unfortunate thing when people who have something to offer, not the nuisances that I talked about with on the relevant interest, locus standi point, not those people who just want to involve themselves for the purposes, sir, of fomenting strife or being a busybody, but people who actually may have something useful to offer. It is the most frustrating and disappointing thing when such persons can come to the point of looking at a Fair Trade Commission that this year, Mr. Speaker, in this year of our Lord, took a decision on depreciation and made a ruling against the Barbados Light and Power, saying that it did not justify rates asked for its generation assets. That's what this Fair Trade Commission did. It took a position on depreciation of the assets and said that the Light and Power does not and will not get the benefit of rates sought on generation assets. That's the assets used to generate electricity. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that same Fair Trade Commission is then looked at and ridiculed and urged that all of them should step down because one member worked with a company that 6 years ago worked with a subsidiary of Emera. You understand what I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker? There is no tribunal in this world. There's no case I could think of having heard cases, seen, read for the last 20-something years of my life that you can ask a whole tribunal to remove themselves from a process and see themselves collectively as being tainted because one member worked at one time for a company, Mr. Speaker, that did a case 6 years ago that was related to a subsidiary of the entity that is before you. But how on a small island could we ever decide anything? And if we're going to come to the point where we are so motivated and actuated by self-interest, and I believe, sir, malice, that you cannot see how you will be frustrating the growth and the development of a whole country by these acts of almost prepubescent immaturity, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, woe betide you. And unless we bridle it, woe betide all of us. As I said, I do not want from this place or from any other to be dragged into any unseemly quarrel with any Barbadian citizen who wants to intervene or object. But I beg that people now participate in a process that we've come here to facilitate. There's no objector or intervener who can, after today, say that this government stood in their way because this government has empowered them in a way that was never done in the structure of this process since 2013 on the day that they sent home the 3,000 people and rushed to put this through Parliament to obfuscate the blow to the public. So we come and we correct mistakes of the past, as we have had to do almost every week that we've been a government for the last 4 years. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I haven't come here and now done that. I am inviting constructive engagement. I will be the first person at the table if we wish to have constructive engagement as to how we can make this sector work better in the interest of the people. But as you're going to be objecting, Mr. Speaker, and coming talking foolishness that seeks to put a barrier between the ability of the working class people in Fitz Village to access solar photovoltaics on their roof so that their home can provide passive income in hard times, so that they can offset the cost of sending the little child to school, offset the cost, Mr. Speaker, sir, of paying the mortgage, offset the cost of all the other bills that have to be paid, then I will be your worst enemy. Because I can't deal with that. I believe, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you're going to engage constructively, then let us engage constructively. But if you have come to make it seem as though this is not a big deal, when the only country on planet Earth that is saying that there is a right to renewable energy for all Barbadian homeowners is this little rock, Mr. Speaker, sir, and you want to sweep that under the carpet as though it never existed. I have a problem with that. Because as I have said at the beginning, this is our opportunity to correct some of the tragedies of the past when sugar in agriculture was making billions of dollars and certain people in this country getting all of the rewards and all of the debt forgiveness and all of the concessions. The working class people that you and I represent, Mr. Speaker, sir, got none. When tourism, sir, replaced it, and all the concessions and all the rewards went into a small pocket or group of pockets in this country, Mr. Speaker, sir, your constituents and mine fix the bed, sweep the room, carry a tray. That's the relationship. This platform of renewable energy gives working class Barbadians an opportunity to become revenue generators, to build a pathway for their family in a way that no lead sector has carried them before in the history of this country. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we as a government will defend it until the bitter end. I want to thank you, sir, for being very patient with me, and I want to ask that this bill be now read a second time.
Beg to second that and seek leave to speak again.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really would not be long at all, but it would be impossible for me to listen to
Your mic is on, I remember. Mic is on.
Thank you. I would not, Mr. Speaker, this morning be very long at all, but it would be impossible for me to have listened to the speech just delivered by the Honourable Member for St. James Central and for the content and not lend my office to support what perhaps is one of the best speeches I've heard in introducing a bill in this Parliament in recent times. And the ability to break down complex matters for the ordinary man and woman in this country to understand was what we just heard. In addition to that, the philosophical underpinnings that have brought the majority of us, if not all of us, into this chamber. And may I say, almost all of the governments that have led us since independence. Because the ability to create a platform for economic enfranchisement while doing a public good nationally and globally by ensuring that we minimize the use of fossil fuels and that we create the opportunities for Barbadians to benefit from the financial and economic gains that are there is why we were elected. Now, this thing has taken much longer than even this government has hoped for. And the reality is that in a small society such as this, where capacity and expertise are limited, things take longer. We have spent the majority of the last 8-9 months, I believe, and the minister can confirm this, trying to deconstruct and trying to ensure as much automaticity in approvals as possible to avoid the reality of 50, 60, 70,000 people applying to be able to have access to photovoltaic panels or some form of renewable energy. The minister has reminded us of the complexity involved in most of these things. But to have persons accuse a government that is simply trying to make the system work in the most transparent way, to accuse us of something that is the complete opposite, tells us that we literally have too many people who are consumed with creating distractions that may be rooted in falsehoods. Now, I say so because this is not the only example. Today I had to read a letter in the media from my senior economic advisor, seeking to correct the very wrong falsehood that the Central Bank of Barbados has been printing money in this country again. And when you look at what the allegations are, you begin to wonder if there's a planet out there with human life and another country called Barbados, because it can't be this planet, Barbados, and it can't be what we've been doing. And the boss bonds that people bought were bought by ordinary public servants and others who then bought from public servants. It wasn't a case of printing money. And to the extent that the central bank issued securities under the pandemic levy, it was because they were issuing securities out of money that was converted from the special drawing rights from the International Monetary Fund, which is the government's money. But we are now, each day and each week, having persons making all kinds of spurious allegations. And I get it, I get it. Because if you can't find something substantive to talk about, then you have to pick something and manufacture it. And I don't believe that all of it is rooted in malice. I really don't. I think that people may be speaking sometimes from a position of not being informed sufficiently or wanting to expose themselves and to pull higher in the tree that they may otherwise reach than they may otherwise reach. And therefore, sometimes they stretch the truth without realizing that the stretching of the truth becomes a falsehood. But I don't accuse them of any malice or any ill intention. And there are things that as a government, we have, and I say it to the members all the time, that when we have the majority that we have an obligation to answer and to repeat and to answer and to repeat, because we have to be able to explain, even if it means that you have to repeat yourself 20 and 30 times to say the same thing. But what we must not ever allow to happen is for a falsehood to take root. And when that falsehood takes root, that is when problems start to emerge. And we see it in the United States of America now. We see it across the world now with so many things. The era of fake news this thing has spoiled us, technology, because it allows anybody to print whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, and very often with impunity, without any hope of being held back. Mr. Speaker, this government made a bold step that before we decide to allow foreign capital, which will come, to dominate and to suck out all of the space that can be had for persons to be able to make a profit in the area of renewable energy, that we had an obligation first and foremost to our citizens. We get that. And that obligation means that the announcement that I made in the budget in March has to be real. That every owner-occupied house in this country must have the right, if they so desire, to be able to have access to that renewable energy mechanism, photovoltaic panels mainly, in order to be able to allow them to earn from passive income, in order to be able to allow them to better support their families, as you heard from the minister, in order to be able to allow them, in some instances, to enter into enterprises by being able to benefit from the income that comes from that. Similarly, it allows the government at a larger level to put to rest decades of subsidies to a sugar industry that has literally taken out from this country the potential that we would have had to do far more for developing people, because we had to put more than $1 billion in the last 50 years to save a handful of people in a sugar industry that literally was in decline for more than even the 50 years. Mr. Speaker, it also allows us to stabilize some other state-owned enterprises, as we have agreed, ensuring that those things that are national public goods, like transport, when this government in the last term had to raise bus fares that had not been raised for over 3 decades. There was a hue and cry across Barbados, and justifiably so, because people feel it. But at the same time, if we were ever to match the true cost of providing transport with the cost, with what people have to pay, people would be hollering for murder from larboard to starboard, from St. Lucie to St. Philip. And therefore, the government finds itself having to continue to subsidize, as it should, access to transport and public transport in this country. But not only to subsidize, we want to subsidize an affordable, reliable, and sound service. And that is why we've invested in the electric vehicles as well, which then puts another imposition upon us to ensure that the charging stations are available across the entire country. Now, Mr. Speaker, we're doing all of these things with limited resources, but we must do them. And what we have said is that we are going to use the opportunity of fighting this climate crisis and building up capacity in renewables to also enfranchise our people. Anybody who doesn't understand that does not understand this government and does not understand why we have come to public life. And nobody or anything is going to remove us from that. But, Mr. Speaker, we are also very clear that when all is said and you give the opportunity to ensure that there can be as many entities and as many people generating, you need stability on transmission and distribution. And if you don't have that stability on distribution, then who is going to benefit? And therefore, you have to work with the Barbados Light and Power. I am not going to get into this thing about demonizing them, because without them, as the minister just said, you're going to have serious problems in ensuring equitable access to electricity, because not everybody can afford a microgrid. And even with a microgrid, people have to buy their own battery storage. So let us be very real that this is about balance. Now, I believe that this country is so limited in resources that all who have something to offer ought to come to the table with the Minister of Energy and to be able to have their say, because after 9 years, it is absolutely clear to us that this Electric Light and Power Act needs comprehensive overhaul, and the ministry is setting about to do that, and that there are huge gaps. There are some that we have required us to act and to enter into the process earlier and to do small amendments. But overall, we need an overhaul of this legislation, and it shall come. I want, Mr. Speaker, therefore, to simply say to the country, look, bear with us. This is the most important intervention in the social and economic and political life of this country since independence, in my view. Renewable energy is a game changer for the country, for our companies, but above all else, for our households. But like with everything else in life, we can't do it alone. And therefore, this demonizing of the Barbados Light and Power has regrettably no place in our ability to be able to ensure that there is a win-win for every one of the categories that I just mentioned, from the country to the company to the individual to the labor movement. Indeed, I am happy that one of the major projects this year is a tripartite project that the minister would have been party to with Barbados National Oil Company, with the Barbados Workers Union in its 80th year, who is at the center of it, and with the Barbados Light and Power, who is representative of the private sector. And I would like to see far more of that type of cooperative partnership across the country, because I really do believe that renewable energy is a game changer for this country. At the same time, I have not hidden my disappointment, and I don't say it in a deprecating way, and we recognize that we have to give and find more resources, even if they're outside of the country, in terms of the kind of capacity that from the Fair Trading Commission to the Ministry of Energy needs in order to expedite the processing of the applications to ensure that as many people can start benefiting as possible, and not just those who have benefited from being first mover because they had the capital and they had the opportunities. But we've gone beyond the homeowner households, and said, look, you may not own a house, but you're not satisfied. And I sat in this parliament and gave all of the figures showing what you would get if you left your money across the road in a bank at 0.01%, you remember? And then showed you what you would get if you were getting a 4% rate of return on a green bond, or any kind of bond issued to be able, for example, to do the battery storage that is so critical because of what the minister explained to you with respect to the limited footprint of sunshine and the ability to store the energy in order to be able to use it. So we recognize that it isn't only homeowners that can benefit from the economic opportunities. Any Barbadian who wants to be able to purchase and who is of sound mind and can purchase the securities must be able to benefit. And the truth is that we do hope as well that we can have a collaborative onshore wind farm that regrettably has been the subject of planning for how long? Over 15 years, 20 years? What madness is that? But there is enough room for investment for everybody to get a piece of the action at a far higher rate of return than if they left the money sitting down in a bank in Bridgetown in this country. And Mr. Speaker, I put it this way because sometimes we need to just pause and apply our hearts to wisdom. The minister who just spoke is also the minister who has been charged with the responsibility of bringing financial literacy to the fore in this country. And why? Because don't listen to us to tell you what investment to get. You should be able to analyze for your own self where and how you put the money that you have. And this government is determined to give you both opportunity and knowledge. And that is why I've risen to intervene in this debate. Because this debate is far more than about simply renewable energy. This debate is about repositioning this country to face the climate crisis, repositioning this country to face a brighter and more stable economic future, but about repositioning the average Barbadian household. And that is the game changer. And it's to this generation, what the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act was to a previous generation. It is to this generation what the protection of labor was to the generation of Grantley Adams and those who came in here in the 50s against the high powers that wanted to block out people. This is our response to reposition this economy and to reposition Barbadian households. And the linkages with the silent revolution in housing that's coming is critical, because there will be Barbadians who would never be considered for a mortgage in this country, who by reason now of the income from that panel and the contracts thereto, with the same Barbados Light and Power, will now be able to be viewed as a viable and appropriate bet for a bank or a credit union with respect to a mortgage. People whose income is volatile, people who don't have anything but an exercise book to show how much money they make last week and last month and last year, and who others might look down on. But when you take that in conjunction with the income that is being securitized from the roof, all of a sudden, even a $400 or $500 a month on an $800 mortgage, and all of a sudden you're looking for $200 or $300 to bridge the gap. That is what the cabinet and the government of Barbados is working on, to ensure that we can put thousands, not hundreds, thousands of Bajans in houses using the unlocking of the renewable energy bounty to be able to make that defining difference to this generation. And why I end on this point. The sun don't belong to nobody in here. Don't belong to nobody on earth. The wind, less so, you can't even feel it. Other than, you can't hold it rather. You can only feel it when it touches you, but you can't hold it. And the water that surrounds us. And we know we got 434 times more water than we got land. If we don't get it, and if we don't come together to make it real and happen for every one of us, then this is a case of us hiding our talents under a bushel. We cannot, my people, we cannot make this exercise more difficult than it ought to be. It is already difficult for us because we do not have the capacity that large countries have. It is already difficult for us because we have limited human resources to do what has to be done. If ever there was a time for Barbadians to pull together to make this revolution in renewable energy happen, it is now. And this opportunity here today, as the Minister said, is just to make it clearer that if you feel that there's a reason for you to have an objection, then this is how you go about it. And rather than it being left vague in legislation that was not intended to really make the opportunity for objection real for you, we are now making the opportunity for the objection real in how you can do it. The timelines are here, the timelines are clear, and we accept that not everybody will have the same perspective. So that in a democracy, you give people that opportunity. But the rules must be clear as to how it is exercised. If not, it becomes simply an obstacle to prolong and delay the exercise. And that doesn't work for the objector, and it doesn't work for the person whose investment is being objected or whose license is being objected to. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend this to this honorable chamber, and I ask the country, as I said, to work with us and bear with us, because this is a major game changer in the future of this country at all levels. I'm obliged to you.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this House do suspend until 1:45.
Question that this honorable chair be suspended until 1:45 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 1:45 p.m.